Well, good morning if I haven't had a chance to say that to you yet. I'm so glad that you're here. I do not like to break the continuity of the spirit and atmosphere of worship to do personal kinds of announcements. So I'm going to do it here in Bible class. I want to mention some things about my family's passion project. That's what the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is. It's my family's passion project. I have 3 daughters, 3 sons-in-law, and 5 grandchildren. They're all involved with the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. And we began it originally to focus on those who had lost their spouses and give them special attention that they have not been getting in recent decades, I think, in our culture. And then we have grown the ministry to want to help people just generally who have experienced loss and people who are struggling with very difficult times. We call it the Widowhood Workshop Ministry because the loss of a spouse is typically, more often than not, the greatest loss experience that a person will have in this life. And if you know something about dealing with the most difficult challenge of loss, then you can navigate the lesser losses that you experience in your life, because some of the same principles and truths that help you with the greatest loss can help you with the lesser losses we experience in our lives. So I wanted to just share with you just a few things. There are some cards, business cards, out there on the table to the left as you go out these 2 doors here. And if you'd like to pick up one of those cards, feel free to do that. On the back of the card, it has even my telephone number on it, as well as the website for the ministry and also the public Facebook page for the ministry. If you're on Facebook, one thing that you can do to help the ministry is you can go to our public page, which is 3 words, Widowhood Workshop Ministry. You can go to that public page, like it, and follow it, and that helps with the ministry in regard to our marketing our ministry to the community, because what we're trying to do more now than ever before is make sure that with the Widowhood Workshop Ministry, we don't just help our brothers and sisters in the Lord. We want to help the communities where we have congregations of the Lord's church. We want to use this ministry to become an outreach and help people become introduced to Jesus and his church through the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. So you liking and following that public Facebook page and maybe sharing some things from that public page occasionally might help to reach some people that otherwise we wouldn't reach, because you have a social network that is unique to you that nobody else has. We also make it a point in the ministry to share as much in the way of resources as we can. One of the things on the website is there are different resources you can go to. There are some videos there. We also have a YouTube channel, and we have things that we're trying to use as resources to help people who are struggling with difficult times in their life. I've written 3 books, each about widowhood, and I just want to mention this to you. You can go on Amazon, you can purchase these books. If you go Kindle, if you like Kindle reading, then you can get these books for $5 a piece on Amazon. But the first book I wrote is called When the End Comes. The second book I wrote the very next year is Before the End Comes, because it's good to prepare for storms. Married couples are unique in that every single married person is a prospective widowed person. I don't say that to scare you, and I never thought about that until my wife died, but that is the reality. The only way you're ever going to become widowed is at some point in your life you say, I do. And that puts you in the risk pool. And so Before the End Comes is addressed with a special emphasis on the married people, but also very helpful to the widowed people. And then the last book I wrote is After the End Comes. So I guess you can call this kind of like Star Wars. It's like a trilogy. Yeah. After the End Comes is another book that I thought was very important, because there are some topics that I write about in that book that I've never seen written about in any brotherhood periodical or book. Like, when have you ever read about male-female relationships after loss? You know how I started that chapter? 1 word and a period. Complicated, period. Male-female relationships, hey, they're complicated before loss, okay? Let's be honest about it. They're really complicated after loss. And then I wrote a chapter in that book about marriage after loss. I wrote a chapter in that book about sex after loss, a natural human desire. So all three of those books were written with married people and their needs, and widowed people and their needs as well. Now, I need to find the clicker thing, which must be up here. Okay. This may seem kind of strange that we're going to have a Bible class about this subject that you see on the screen. The blessing of marriage and widowhood. You're probably not shocked by the first phrase there, the blessing of marriage, but kind of weird to connect the word blessing with widowhood, isn't it? We're going to talk a little bit about that. I don't want to lecture to you this morning. Please save yourself from that experience. This is what I call a thinking out loud together session. So I want you to feel free to participate however you would like, but I'm never going to call on anybody to make them feel compelled. Have you ever thought about this? How weird it is for the vast majority of us that the person that we married, or if you're not yet married, the person that you will marry is a person that was a total stranger to you for decades maybe in your life, definitely years in your life. Now, there was an exception to that in the Hartville, Ohio church. Oprah and Mary Bledsoe were, they were older than dirt when I married them. No, they were older than dirt when I was introduced to them, I should say. And the whole time I knew them, I thought they were older than dirt. Of course, that was a time in my life when I was in my early 40s, so older than dirt was probably anybody after 60. Oprah and Mary Bledsoe used to brag about the fact that they slept together before they got married. And of course, when you say that, it just shocks people. Here this old fella and this older woman, and they're bragging about sleeping together before they got married. Well, they actually did in a bassinet. They were both babies in a bassinet. And they had some pictures of that, as a matter of fact. They were an exception to the rule. They had known one another really from birth. Now, I want to ask you, how about the people that are sitting in this room? Is there anybody here that knew the person you got married to your whole life? Is there anybody in the room? I thought maybe there might be, but there's nobody that you knew. Now, I want you to stop and think about, I read this on the internet, so I know it's true. There are 8 billion plus people on planet Earth. Now, I don't know very many of that 8 billion, okay? I know a few, okay, but nowhere near 8 billion plus. 8 billion plus people on planet Earth. Now, how many people are in your marriage? Only you and that one other person. And that other person was a total stranger to you. And yet you crossed paths. And you fell in love, and you got hitched. I like the way Dr. Dobson phrases it. It really is. It's phenomenal. It almost defies description. In Matthew 19, Jesus references the beginning. He who made them at the beginning, made them male and female. Then he mentioned about they're no longer two, but one flesh. Does anybody know of any other human relationship described in the Bible with those 2 words, one flesh? How about the parent-child relationship? Or the brother-sister relationship? Or even the brother-sister relationship in the Lord? You think about our friendships, our co-workers, our human relationships. Of all the human relationships, there's only one described in the Bible with that unique phrase, one flesh. And to think that a person could go from a total stranger for years, and then you have a one flesh relationship with that person. Just think about what a phenomenal thing that is. It's an amazing thing to think about. If you're married, I hope you appreciate it. I say that as a person who admits that when I was a married guy, I didn't appreciate my marriage as much as I should have. You know what prompted me to have much deeper gratitude? When she died. And I had to start living every day and every night of my life without my wife. She died on Christmas morning of 2013. August the 19th of 2014 was the first wedding anniversary that I had to endure without her. In prepping myself for that and trying to use that to be of help to others, I wrote 2 articles back to back in the Hartville, Ohio Church's bulletin, right in the middle of August. The title of those articles was the same. The only difference was Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, and here was the title. I thought I did, but not nearly enough. I thought I appreciated my wife. I thought that I appreciated marriage and the blessing of being married to her, but not nearly enough. I thought that I'd expressed my appreciation to her, but not nearly enough. I cannot find the words in the English language. They're just not available. The words where I could actually communicate to you accurately what a tremendous, precious blessing it is to enjoy life married. There just are not words in the English language to communicate that. I wish I would have felt like that when I was married, but I didn't. I was so busy with my everyday life, and we become so hectic in the way that we schedule our lives and we live our lives. It is so easy for us to take even the best of blessings for granted. If you're able to sit with somebody in public worship, and when somebody begins to lead us in prayer, and you can reach over and you can hold the hand of that person, count that as a blessing. If you can sit beside that person and you can put your arm around them, if you can hug that person, remember that's a really choice blessing. That one flesh relationship is priceless. I just want you to know that. I want you to be reminded of that. That blessing came from God. Well, in paradise, and it was a really cool place from all I can tell, you know, this whole Eden thing, that's a pretty good gig for Adam. I mean, there was no sin. There were no cataclysmic weather events, and there was no illness, and everything was really cool. I mean, it was a beautiful place. Now, I wonder how long Adam was there by himself. I have a lot of questions that I've never thought about until I lost my wife. The loss of my wife has caused me to think about a lot of things I've never thought about before. So I wonder, Adam's in paradise, in this perfect place. How long was he there by himself? How long did he experience that as a bachelor? Well, then there's this parade where I can just kind of imagine God saying to Adam, Adam, here, sit there at that log, and I want you to enjoy this parade. And then there's this parade of animals that go by, and Adam says, donkey, cow, bird, dog, and then the end of the parade's all done, and he's there with living creatures, not just stones and dirt and trees, but living creatures. And I wonder how he felt at that point. Which one of those living creatures was he going to take out to the movie? Or sit with his arm around watching TV? Which one of those was he going to text? See, though they were living creatures, he was A-L-O-N-E. I don't know this for a fact, but I just suspicion that parade that Adam experienced was planned to impress him with the fact that he was alone, that he had no helper fit for him. Well, then he's put to sleep, and then Genesis chapter 2, verse 23, when God brings that woman to him, and remember, she's unclothed. He's a man. She's a woman. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. I seriously doubt that that was his tone of voice or that was his volume. Wow! Are you kidding me? This is bone of my bones. This is flesh of my flesh. She shall be called, whoa, man. Yeah, whoa, man. You know, it had to be such ecstasy for him to experience that. I just kind of think God was prepping him for the experience of having that blessing. And what a blessing that was. I hope you appreciate your marriage. Now, I want you to think about Adam and Eve. Maybe think about some things you hadn't thought about before. Now, one thing that I wonder about also, I wonder about how long Adam was in that garden alone as a bachelor. I wonder at the end of chapter 2, at verse 25, when it says, they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Now, the serpent was more cunning. Then it starts with the temptation and the fall. How much time was between chapter 2, verse 25, and chapter 3, verse 1? How long were Adam and Eve in the paradise, in the Garden of Eden, in that perfect place? And now each of them have somebody to enjoy that experience with. If you were to be able to talk to Adam, and you were to ask him, Adam, what was the quality of your satisfaction or joy or contentment in the Garden of Eden prior to Eve, in contrast with your contentment and satisfaction and joy in the Garden of Eden after you were blessed with Eve? Which was better? What do you think he'd say? When you share blessings together, the joy is magnified. Just like when we share burdens, the burden is lightened. When we have somebody to share our joyful, positive, and blessed times with, it magnifies the experience, right? Okay, now, Adam and Eve, they were in the Garden of Eden together for some period of time in that perfect place. Boy, wouldn't that be awesome? What a blessing that would be. Then Satan comes. Okay, now they both experience exposure to Satan. And then they plunge into sin. Now, I want you to remember that they experienced that together, right? Just like they experienced that perfection together, now they experienced the fall together. Have you ever wondered why Adam did what he did? 1 Timothy chapter 2, we know why Eve did what she did. She was deceived. The woman being deceived, Paul tells us in 1 Timothy 2, that's why she took the forbidden fruit. But that same chapter in 1 Timothy 2 tells us Adam was not deceived. He knew full well what he was doing. Why in the world would he do that? You know, I can't help but wonder that. One of the things that I do wonder about is, did he think back about the garden experience prior to Eve and his aloneness? And he thought, if she was going down, I'm going to go down with her. I wonder if that prompted him to do what he knew was wrong in the first place. Now, in Adam and Eve's life, after they were booted out of the Garden of Eden, tell me something that they would have struggled with. I mean, I'm sure you remember the story in the first part of the book of Genesis. What did they struggle with? Did they have any family issues? Did they have children? If they had children, they had issues, okay? Let's be real honest here, okay? Okay, you have kids, and kids struggle, right? How bad did these two kids struggle? Mightily. There was some real serious issues with this one kid that they were losing gradually because of his hatred and jealousy. And what did one of their kids do to the other kid? Killed him. Can you imagine being the parent of two boys, one of whom kills the other? Can you imagine what that did to their marriage? How that affected them? Now remember, they're not single, they're married. So they're experiencing that together. Let's talk about Noah and Mrs. Noah. Okay, we know about these sons, and don't you think they rejoiced when those children were born, just like Adam and Eve? Don't you think they really just were thrilled at the birth of their sons? And Noah and Mrs. Noah, they have sons too, and so they experienced that joy of having children, and then they also shared together in the struggle of raising those children. Well, then the flood comes. Okay, now, does anybody know how long that they were in the ark, cooped up in that big honking boat? Over a year. Now, I want you to stop and think about this in a way you've never maybe thought about it before. Now, how many of you have been to the Ark Encounter? Okay, yeah, a lot of you have been there. It's it just is amazing, isn't it? To be able to get that visual, to actually be able to see with your eyes literally how huge of a vessel that was. Just amazing. Okay, now, how many people are in the ark? Okay, now, how many of those people were in-laws? Now, you probably know where I'm going on this, okay? Now, Noah and Mrs. Noah, they're stuck in a boat over a year with their in-laws. Could you survive a year stuck in the same circumstance with your in-laws? Do you think, have you ever thought about what went on in that boat during that year period? Do you think there were any disagreements? Now, these are 8 human beings, okay? Do you think there were any disagreements? Do you think there were any stressors? Do you think there were any problems? And you know what Noah and Mrs. Noah did? They experienced that together. Together. Now you've got, how about Abraham and Sarah? Okay, they have this promised child that's going to be coming, but they have a problem with waiting. So what cockamamie idea do they come up with? What does she suggest? Okay, just use my maid, okay, and we'll make this happen. We'll help God out. Obviously, he needs help. So they cook up this idea, and he buys into it. I mean, that just proves how stupid a couple can be. I mean, let's be honest about it. You know, when two people get married, the problem with marriage isn't the theory. It's the people involved. Because when you have a marriage, you have two imperfect people. And two imperfect people, at times, there's going to be things that are not going to go right because of their limited knowledge, limited experience, or some weaknesses and flaws that they have. So Abraham and Sarah, they come up with this plan, and they cooperate together. And how well does it go? Well, then there's all this stress. Abraham and Sarah are dealing with this marital stress because of this Hagar and this kid, but they're experiencing that. There's that word together again. They're experiencing this together. Does anybody know how long they had to wait for that promised child to finally get there? 1/4 century. Now, which is easier, waiting all by yourself or waiting with somebody else? Then you think about Moses and his wife. Think about all the stresses that Moses went through. Do you think he brought his problems home, from work? Those Israelites drove him nuts. Now, when he has a marriage, his experience as a leader with the Israelites is going to affect the marriage. But they experience that together. That's one of the jewels of being married, is you get to experience things together. The good stuff, that maximizes your joy. And then the bad stuff, that helps you because you have somebody else to experience that with. As a matter of fact, somebody suggested that what marriage is it's like a friendship that catches fire. And that's, I think, a beautiful way of describing how unique that human relationship is. It is a friendship of a unique nature because it's a friendship that has caught fire. And from that point forward, you're dealing with life together. But then there's the reality, Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed unto men once to die. I've been noticing lately that 1 out of 1 dies. You can't get out of this life alone. I mean, escaping the death experience. Now, when somebody dies that's married, that leaves somebody behind. Now, you talk about a storm. There's a storm. Sometimes those deaths occur real quickly. They're just shocking. Like in Trenton, Tennessee, when Bradford was traveling through town and his wife was down a little bit further south in Bolivar, Tennessee. And he's in this awful accident and he dies. They've only been married a little over 1,300 days. And she got up that morning and she was married. And before the sun went down, she's widowed. And then you've got Tandy over in West Kentucky. She comes home and she puts her purse on her washer and dryer like she always does. And she walks down the hall and she finds her husband in a pool of blood and the gun. And he's taken his life. And Emily, 34 years old, in Middle Tennessee, she's awakened by her 36-year-old husband having a heart attack. And so she pulls him off the bed because she needs a hard surface to give him CPR. And she tries desperately to save him. Calls 911, has him brought to the hospital. And then about 2 days later, she posts on her Facebook page a video of her husband's body on a bed, being wheeled down a hall, being honored by all the medical staff there on both sides of the hall as he was being wheeled to where they were going to harvest his organs because he was an organ donor. But she's the 34-year-old widow, and they have a child about first or second grade. The only way a good marriage ends is somebody dying. I don't say that to scare any married person. I say that to encourage you to appreciate what you have before you lose it. There are many ways bad marriages end. Many ugly ways bad marriages end. There's only one way a good marriage ends. And that's why we need to learn about widowhood before we experience it, because it's a storm. I appreciate the observation that somebody made where she said this: I think the hardest part of losing someone isn't having to say goodbye, but rather learning to live without them. See, there's a difference between suffering the loss of a person. When a person dies, that's what I mean by the loss of a person. There's one thing that you can say about a person dying that you loved. That's hard, that's awful. But I'll tell you what's even more hard. That's learning to live without that person every day and every night for the rest of your life. That's the bigger challenge. Now, I never knew that until I began to experience it, then began to read everything I could get my hands on, and then had an opportunity to talk to a lot of widowed people. You know, the two hardest places for a widowed person to go in those early times after the loss of their spouse by death is to bed, which is an ugly, harsh reminder, U-R-A-L-O-N-E. And the other place is to church. And there have been buckets of tears cried in church buildings because of the harshness of the adjustment of learning to come and worship the Lord that you love without the one that blessed you so many years in your life as a husband or a wife. Marriage is a wonderful blessing. And one of the great blessings is you get to experience life together. But there's also an end, and that's a really stormy time. It's good to have somebody with you when you're going through storms in your life. That husband or wife, that's a beautiful idea, concept God had. But then there's going to be a time when one's going to be left behind. That's going to be a very stormy time. And what happens then is you're released or free. Now, you may be in the eyes of God released or free, but you may not be inside of you. That's one reason why sometimes people who are widowed, they wear their rings for years afterwards, sometimes the rest of their lives. They just still feel married. I took my ring off 5 years after my wife passed away on the very day, that exact 5-year mark. I just knew I needed to do it probably at some point in time, but it had kind of grown on me. I've been wearing it since I was 19 years old. It had become a part of me. The funny thing about trying to take my ring off is I was at Disney World on that day, on that Christmas day, and I was in charge of my youngest granddaughter who wanted to see Woody. And you know how long those lines can be? And how sometimes it can be a lot more time in that line than you think. Well, what I wanted to do was I wanted to take that ring off right at 9:40 in the morning on Christmas morning 5 years afterwards. But we were in that line, and I looked at my watch, and I didn't want to disappoint my granddaughter, and so I thought, what am I going to do? Because I want to do this in private. Well, I conceded to my granddaughter. I don't know that she's ever heard this story. She's 10 years old now. I let her go ahead and see Woody, and after her mother showed up to take charge of her, I went over to a quiet place and tried to take the ring off, and I couldn't get it off. All the heat and humidity and how I was swelling, I couldn't get it off. I thought, oh man, you know, I had such a great plan. This was going to be so therapeutic and give me some closure. So I had to go into the men's restroom, and I had to soap up my hands. And I finally did get it off and put it in my pocket. You know, it can be that sometimes how you feel isn't consistent with how God thinks. So I'm released or free, but sometimes it's hard to grapple with that and embrace that after your spouse has died. Now, the blessing of widowhood, there's always blessings. Even in the ugliest of circumstances in our life, there are always blessings. We need to remind ourselves of that. I want you to think about that in regard to widowhood. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, there is a lot of writing about marriage. And among the things talked about is about the unmarried state, the people who are not married. And there are some phrases that you see on the screen that are used to describe people in that circumstance. Without care. Now, not literally without all care, but without the care that comes with being married. When you are married, you have cares, right? You have responsibilities. You are investing in that relationship. Cares for the things of the Lord. See, without those distractions, and he's not bad-mouthing marriage here. The same person who wrote 1 Corinthians 7 wrote Ephesians 5, where there's so much talk about the husband loving his wife and the wife respecting the husband. He's just talking about the reality of the fact that when you're married, do you know what marriage is all about? It's about the total giving of the total self for a total lifetime. That's what marriage is all about. If you want a magnificent marriage, no matter what the condition of your marriage is right now, if you want a magnificent marriage, here's the prescription. Total giving of the total self for a total lifetime. When two people have that philosophy and they buy into that philosophy, you can take two imperfect people and you can create a magnificent marriage. But you've got to heavily invest in it. Now, when you no longer have that relationship to invest in, what are you going to do with your life? You have the blessing of freedom that you didn't want. You want to be married. You wanted to be married. That's why you got married. And now that's been taken away from you. Life gifts you blessings. And when you're married, that is a real blessing. And please appreciate that marriage when you have it. Life also, though, gives you things you don't want, like loss, like widowhood. Now you might say, well, I don't want it. Well, life doesn't matter, doesn't care what you want or what you think. Sometimes life gives you things you're stuck with, like a disease, for instance. Or for some people, a divorce they didn't want. So what are you going to do when you get something from life that you don't want? Well, you need to find a way to take that and turn it into a blessing. With all that extra time that you have now, not married, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? You're not dead. Your spouse is dead. That is your late wife or your late husband. What are you going to do now with the rest of your life? There is a famous line out of the first Spider-Man movie where the uncle is sitting at the table with the boy who's morphing into Spider-Man. And the wise uncle said to the boy, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, I want to suggest to you that with great loss comes great power. When you've experienced great loss in your life, finances, marriage, health, virginity by rape, friendships, whenever you've experienced great loss, you know what you now have? You have great power. The power of influence, because you've been through something that you can use now that you have that experience to help other people. See, with great loss comes great responsibility because you have greater power. I was so proud of Katrina in Lufkin, Texas, who texted me one Sunday, and she said, Dean, I think you'll be proud of me. She said, this morning after the amen, she said, I went to a couple of young ladies, and I talked to them privately, and I encouraged them to love their husbands, and to really appreciate what they are enjoying in their life, what they have in their life in the way of a blessing. See, Katrina had lost 2 husbands. She's in her early 50s at this point in time. She's lost 2 husbands. And she's the one that goes to these young ladies and tells them to be great wives and love their husbands and appreciate their marriage. Now, I'll tell you, a guy behind a pulpit on Sunday morning at church could have said the same thing, but it wouldn't have had the power that Katrina's words had because of her experience. With great loss comes great power, the power of influence. And sometimes the loss causes us to have greater gratitude. Sometimes it's when we lose things, sadly, we become more grateful for them because we miss them and we now appreciate how blessed we were. The things that we experience sometimes in our life gives us a different perspective. You know, there are temporary things and then there are eternal things. Since my wife's passed away, one of the blessings that I have embraced is my lack of concern about a lot of things. There are a lot of things now that don't matter. I mean, there are so many things that don't matter. I mean, if I drove a rental car accidentally back to a vertical 4x4 pole and I dented the back of that rental vehicle, which I did do in East Tennessee, and that cost me money, That didn't matter a bit. Now, years ago, that would have mattered. That didn't matter a bit. You know, sometimes we place greater value on things than they really should have. We need to look at things from an eternal perspective. And some of the things that cause us to look at those eternal things more is when we lose things here in this life. Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the things which are seen are temporary. The things that are unseen are eternal. It's the eternal things that really matter. And it's the eternal things that we're reminded of that really matter when we've lost things of a temporary nature here in this life. I want to conclude with asking you to think about one thing in regard to life. And here it is. Life in 3 words. People, relationships, and experiences. That's what life is. It's not about the things. It's not about our occupation. It's not about our physical appearance, whether we're young or vibrant or older and hardly able to get around. It's not our age. It's not our physical condition. It's people, relationships, and experiences. That's really where the value of life is, and that's really what life is all about. In that upper left-hand corner, that was in Ohio. Those 2 ladies, they have been through the wonderful experience of being married, the awful experience of losing their marriage mate. In the upper right-hand corner, those are 4 people I met in Groesbeck, Texas. The lady in the lower left, her name is Jarrett, G-E-R-I-T. She lives in the Pacific Northwest, up around Seattle and Tacoma. She was in a wheelchair when I was out there for a workshop. She was the reason why that I was out there. She's widowed, but she's also lost a lot of her physical ability. In the lower right-hand corner, that's in Middle Tennessee at a Widowhood fellowship. You know, there are a lot of people in this life that we interact with. We need to be a blessing to those other people, and they can always be a blessing to us. People, relationships, and experiences, that's what really matters. Consider yourself dismissed.